So please complete that. And now I'd like to introduce Russ King. He is with Benningfield Group. He is also our favorite Codes and Standards trainer. And with that, Russ, take it away.
Good. Thanks. Will you do the honors? Hand those out. All right. Well, they always mention the survey right before I talk. I don't know if that's a good thing or bad. The energy codes change approximately every 3 years. And my personal opinion is that the energy codes have about a 3 to 4 year learning curve. And that's a big problem. That's a real big problem, okay? The energy code changes affect a lot of people that you don't realize, like trainers. Every 3 years, I have to go through all of our training materials and rewrite them to make sure that they match the new code. And then there's a phase where we have to teach both versions, because you have to teach the old version because it's still in effect and will continue to be in effect for a while. And then you have to teach the new version because it's going to start in a little while. And there's about a 4 to 6 month period where they both are being enforced. Because the code takes effect when somebody submits for a permit. Okay, when they go into a building department, let's say they're building a house, if they get in before the end of the year, they fall under the old code. But they may not start construction for 3 or 4 months. They may not finish construction for a year. So they're still under the old code, even though they're in a year where the new code is in effect for new submittals. Okay, so there's this weird transition period. And for that to happen every 3 years is a big deal. The good news is the codes are getting tighter and tighter and tighter, and they're going to hit a point where they can't get any tighter, zero net energy, or unless they have plans to go to positive energy where houses are producing energy instead of using zero energy. That's always a possibility. But so they're going to get to a point where they're going to have to stop changing, and they'll start improving. Okay, and we've already kind of got to that point where instead of making these huge leaps towards more energy efficiency, they've kind of stopped and they're trying to fix some of the issues. Clarify some of the gray areas, plug some of the loopholes and things like that. And that's really what's happening a lot, okay? So my talk is primarily, so the people that are affected are trainers like myself, designers, architects. They have to know the new code so they can design a house to the new code. Energy consultants who help with that process have to know, okay? Installers, people who install equipment, need to know what the new code is. And then probably one of the most impacted groups of people are the enforcement agencies. Okay, they're the ones who have to make sure the code is being followed. So at a building department, that's the building departments, okay, and at a building department you have different kinds of people. You've got, they call them permit techs, okay, that's the people who are collecting the information when they bring it in to get a permit. And so they need to know to make sure that that packet is complete. You have plan checkers. They review the plans to make sure everything on the plan meets the current code, okay? And by the way, there's other codes out there. The energy code is not the only code in the world, all right? We tend to think of it sometimes, but there's building, plumbing, mechanical, electrical, fire, disabled access, okay? There's all kinds of codes out there, and they're all changing, okay? So this is a big deal. So you got permit techs, you got plan checkers, and then you got field inspectors. They're the folks that go out into the field to look at the house being built to make sure that they're following the plans and that they're installing the right stuff, okay? So my talk is primarily for enforcement agencies. How are these code changes affecting those people, okay? And I'll just tell you, the good news is not a big deal, not a big deal. From 2013 to 2016, it's not huge at all. It's affecting other people more than building departments. Designers, consultants, people like that, it's affecting quite a bit. Installers, it's affecting quite a bit. But for building departments, it's not affecting them that much because they get their information from certain things, and what's on those things is changing, okay? They're still going to the same places to get that information. It's just now what they're looking for in a house is going to be more efficient. Instead of R39 or R38, it's going to be R49. They're still looking for something, and they're still checking off on the same list and things like that. So that's the short version of my talk, is not a whole lot of big changes. There are a few changes, a few subtle changes that are important to talk about, though. All right. So I want to talk about how the 2016 changes affect permit application, plan check, and field inspection. Okay. On the residential side, you have a handout. Looks like this, right there. This is one of our handouts we use in our training, several of our classes, energy code enforcement training. And it's a nice one-page summary of the overall compliance process for the energy code. And this is the residential version, okay? So really quick, I like to tell people when they say that, oh, the energy code is really complex, I go, no. It's as simple as 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. CF1R, CF2R, CF3R. That's really the essence of it. And that's right here on this far left-hand side. The 1R, the first step, step 1, is figuring out what's required. What are you supposed to do in a house? What are you supposed to put in a house? That's documented on the CF1R. That's the list of features that that house needs. There's different ways to get a CF1R. In new construction residential, this is my opinion, I would bet that 99.99% of homes use the performance approach. Is that a safe bet? Probably a safe bet. That only 1 out of 1,000 homes will actually comply using the prescriptive approach for new construction. Very rare. All right, so here's your performance approach. Here's your prescriptive approach. The features come from 2 different places. On the prescriptive approach, it comes from a table. Performance approach comes with software, okay? And all the software is doing is saying, we want to build a house that would use the same amount of energy as if we were to use the prescriptive approach, okay? Or just use a prescriptive approach. The performance says, all right, you can put in different features, but you have to prove to us that you're not going to use more energy than if you were to build it to the prescriptive package. So they use a computer software program to do that. And so you get different features, okay? So you get a CF1R, PERF, or these other CF1Rs. On the back of that handout is a list of all the forms, okay? So step 1, figure out what's required. You get a CF1R PERF. You want to make sure that that information is accurate to the plans. So this is all happens in plan check. Once they're happy with that, they issue the permit and they start building the house. At that point, the energy features are broken into 2 categories. One category are features that the building department looks for, and another category is features that have been delegated to a special inspector called a HERS rater. This is a trained, certified individual whose job is to go out to a house and perform inspections and tests and diagnostics to make sure it meets certain requirements, okay? The CF2R is a form, is a certificate that documents what's installed in the house. So the installer will fill out a form saying, I read the CF1R, I know what I'm supposed to put in, I put in the right stuff, here's a list, and they sign it. It's a certificate of installation, okay? All important energy features have a certificate of installation. That's the big list. This one and this one. There's 2 categories. There's one that ends in an E that's enforced by the enforcement agency, and there's ones that end in an H that are enforced by HERS raters, okay? So obviously, lots and lots of forms, okay? So that's these 2 categories here. You get the CF2Rs, and then you get the CF3Rs. For the features that are enforced by or inspected by the HERS rater, the building department needs some evidence that that inspection happened and that it passed. We call that a CF3R. So what's required, what's installed, what's verified. 1, 2, 3. That's it. That's all there is to it. I wish it was that simple. But really, that's the essence of it. And if you keep that in mind, it all sort of falls into place a little bit better. Okay. So from a building department's perspective, when things change, they're going to change over here. This is where most of the changes happen. That's the prescriptive tables. That's the tables that your house is being compared to in order to demonstrate compliance. So if they make all those features more efficient, you have to pick features that match that efficiency. different features, but the bottom line has to be the same, okay? But from a building department's perspective, you're still looking at a CF1R and figuring out what you have to go inspect for and what has to be on the plans, okay? That process hasn't changed. Oh, sorry. I forgot I had all these individual slides in there. So CF1Rs, these are all CF2Rs. If I were to create a list of the CF3Rs, it would be this list right here. It's the CF2Rs that end in an H. If I copied this list, pasted it, and changed all these 2s to 3s, that would be the list of 3Rs. Okay, and that's essentially what this sentence says right there. Okay, so imagine, so you see this list, and I'll take this list and copy it down here. That's a huge list of forms that have to be tracked. There's a really, really nice online tool that tracks all these forms for everybody. It's called a HERS registry. Every project, which is every new house, has to have some HERS verification, which means the project has to be registered in the registry, which means all the forms they're actually generated by the registry. They're filled out, they're signed, all online, and then a lot of building departments require hard copies, so they're printed. But the process, you could actually do this entire process start to finish without printing out any paper at all. It's possible, okay? But a lot of building departments like hard copies because there's a process of handing something to the next person, keeping track of it, putting it in a file and stuff like that. That's fine. But you could do it 100% electronic, even the plans. There's a lot of building departments that are going to all electric plans now, where the actual plans are electronic. No more big, huge rolls of paper they have to keep track of. Okay? So, the basic process doesn't change. Most of the changes occur in the prescriptive requirements for new construction. Vast majority of homes use the performance approach. Okay? The prescriptive measures are mainly the features on the standard house that the proposed house is being compared to. I'll have a little diagram of that in a second. The proposed house will be more efficient than in 2013, but the exact features will still vary from house to house. Okay, so there's no building inspector out there has the prescriptive packages memorized, so they're going to have to rely on a piece of paper or the plans to figure out what to inspect for. The only difference between 2013 and 2016 is that those features are a little more efficient than they used to be. Okay. They still have to go back to the CF1R perf to figure out what that house needs. So this is kind of a little diagram that illustrates what the performance approach is all about. It's basically 2 annual computer simulations of 2 different houses. And by annual energy simulation, it's pretty fascinating. If you imagine building a little computer model of a house and then subjecting it to 1 year's worth of weather. Okay, what is it now, by minute? It used to be by hour.
I think it's minute.
It's by minute. So 365 days broken down into minutes of the sun spinning around this house. Okay, and there's a little robot family lives inside the house and they take showers and turn on the dishwasher and stuff like that. Okay.
They're not in there.
They're a happy little robot family. And so at the end of this 365 days, it spits out a number. And it says, this is how much energy your house is going to use. And they do that twice. They do that once for what they call the standard house. That's the house that sets the target. That's the house that has the prescriptive features in it, okay? And that's this house here. It's got all your standard features, which now I should have changed my drawing, right? This is the standard house now has an instantaneous water heater, doesn't it? So it does this annual energy simulation and it spits out a number, okay? And then they'd say, all right, we don't exactly like these features. And the number 1 feature they don't like the most that's in this list of prescriptive measures is glass area. The prescriptive measures tell you how much glass you can put in a house. Not only that, but how much of that glass can face west. And that's a real problem for some people. So they go, nah, heck with that, I want more glass. So they put more windows on their house. That's going to make this number go up and be too high for this number. So a lot of these other features have to be better than these features. Okay? What else? So what's changing in the 2016 code is a lot of these features are changing. And the big one is the way they design attics, okay? Now, it's a high-performance attic, which means instead of just having insulation on the ceiling, it's actually also under the roof deck. Historically, and the way houses are typically built, all the roof does is keep the rain off the roof, off the ceiling. The roof keeps the rain off the ceiling. The problem is, we live in a pretty hot climate, and the sun's beating down on that roof, and that heat's getting inside that attic, and we like to put our ductwork up there. And our ductwork has very cold air inside of it in the summertime, and that's bad. So now we got to try to keep that heat out of the attic. So now we insulate the attic and the ceiling. So we keep the heat out of the attic, which keeps it out of the ducts, which keeps it out of the house. Okay? So this house now has insulation up here. Now you may say, I don't want to do that. That's my roofer. He's an old school guy. He has no idea how to deal with that kind of stuff. So I don't want to do that. That's fine. You just have a different house. You just got to make all these features. I call it the energy buffet. They go through and they pick out whatever features they want. They run it, and either this number is less than this one or it's not. If it's not, they got to put better features in this house. Okay. So the features in the proposed house will have to result in similar reduced overall energy use. So this number goes down in 2016, therefore this number goes down in 2016. Okay? But from a building department's perspective, they're still getting a list of features that they've got to go check in the field. Okay? Not a whole lot's changed there. Now the mandatory measures, these are prescriptive features, these are your performance features. Before any of that, and overarching all that, is what we call the mandatory measures. Those are things you always have to do. They're also the absolute minimums that you can't go below. Okay, there's a mandatory minimum. No matter how efficient you make the rest of this house, you can't go below R22 in the attic. You know, if you modeled R19 in the attic and you got it to pass because the rest of your features were so awesome, you still can't do it because mandatory measure says, nope, can't go below R22. Okay, so there's this other thing, mandatory measures. So that's something that building departments, specifically field inspectors, need to keep an eye on. Okay. One of the changes to the mandatory measures is something called the solar ready zone. Okay. When you have a subdivision that's got, is it more than 10 or 10? 10 or more. 10 or more. Oh, I had it right. Houses in a subdivision, it triggers this requirement, and that is that a certain amount of their roof area has to be unimpeded by plumbing vents and roof vents and things like that, so that they can put panels up there. Okay, and it was kind of a tricky, you know, they allowed like gazebos and garages and stuff to come into play and all this other stuff. But when you're building a subdivision and those houses are being turned in all different directions, it gets really tricky. Okay, so one of the changes is they made more exceptions. They said, okay, if it doesn't work for you, fine, do something else instead. So they gave them more exceptions. That's an overall improvement. Okay. The minimum ceiling insulation went down. It went down. What are you guys thinking? And when it used to be R30, now it's R22. So the actual minimum ceiling insulation went down. This is an absolute minimum. You can't go below that. It's almost always exceeded. Whatever they do, the performance run, the prescriptive, whatever, is almost always going to be more than that number anyway, so that rarely comes into play. The only time that's ever really an issue is when you have some weird rafter or something where that's the only thing that will fit, okay? And they just can't go more than that. But usually in a typical attic, they're going to go more than that because that's a really cheap way to bump up your features to make it past the performance approach. The allowed duct leakage for new construction used to be 6%. Now it's 5%. From a building department's perspective, they don't care. HRS rater verifies that number. The HRS rater goes out and tests that number, submits a CF3R, it says it passes. Okay, it doesn't affect building departments at all. How did you guys come up with 5%? Just curious. Is it easier to do the math?
Give me 3 seconds.
Okay. I always wonder how you guys come up with like 40 feet of ducts that triggers the duct leakage test.
39 was a funny number.
Yeah, yeah. You know how many 39-foot duct replacements there are out there? It's amazing, yeah.
They would ask, so where do I measure? And I'd be like, I'm from the top? Like, I'm
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
does it matter? Doesn't matter.
So that's an important change. It's gone down a little bit, but it doesn't affect building departments at all. AC and heat pump systems now have to have a liquid line filter dryer installed per manufacturer's instructions. That's a new widget that building departments do need to inspect for. That's a new thing to put on their checklist, but it's really easy. It's a little, typically a blue canister. You know, between your house and your condenser, there's those two copper lines come out. The smaller of the two is going to have this little blue canister on it. Check it out, really simple. Storage water heaters no longer need external blankets. There was this really bizarre thing in the tables for water heaters. There was like this really small range of efficiencies for a certain gallon water heater that needed a blanket. It was really bizarre. That's gone, okay? That's a good thing. One less thing to inspect for. Instantaneous water heaters, tankless water heaters, now have to have isolation valves. That's just a little valve that closes off the hot and cold water so they can work on the water heater, so they can flush it out, so they can change it if they need to. Just another thing that has to be inspected for, okay? Really simple. Lighting, we talked about this. All luminaires must be high efficacy. This is an overall simplification. It used to be some had to be high efficacy, some could be low efficacy. There was 50% in the kitchens, and what was really funny about that rule is if you didn't have if your high efficacy was slightly less than 50%, one of the ways to achieve that was by adding more lights. Well, that's counter to, that's not what you want to do, but it made that 50% efficiency thing work. And so, you know, building departments and building inspectors were going nuts because it wouldn't pass, and they'd come in and they'd add lights and it would pass. Well, that's not what you want to do. Well, that's all gone now. So now it's a lot more strict. So all lights now have to be high efficacy instead of just some of them. But from a building department's perspective, it's more easy. It's easier to inspect. Okay. Screw-based fixtures, that's your typical old-fashioned light bulb, screw-in light bulb. They used to say that could not be high efficacy no matter what kind of bulb you put in it, because as Javier was saying, the old compact fluorescents, they blinked and they pinged and they took a while to warm up, and people hated them. They changed them out. Well, now LED bulbs are so prevalent. There's aisles of them. Go into Lowe's and Home Depot. There's whole sections of LED bulbs. Even the little tiny screw-in candelabra, they have LED bulbs for those. And they're very reasonable price. I've seen them as low as $3 or $4 for a 60-watt equivalent. As long as they have a high efficacy bulb screwed into them, the screw-in type fixtures are now considered high efficacy. I think that's a great thing. Okay, so that's an improvement. This one, delegation of signature authority. I won't dive too deeply into this one. But basically, those CF2R forms, those certificates of installation where the installer says, I read the CF1R, I know as I was supposed to install, I installed the right stuff, here it is, and then they sign it. There's language in there that now allows the rater to sign that document. I'm not sure that's a good idea. But apparently their legal department says we can't prevent that from happening, but other people can, such as building departments. Building departments can say, no, we don't want that to happen. We want the installer to sign that form, not the rater. Okay? But by allowing this, one of the big problems, so I mentioned that HERS registry and that tool, and people go in and sign it. It's really hard sometimes to get HVAC contractors, insulation contractors to log in to the internet, to go online, to open a project, to click a box. Sounds easy for us who deal with that kind of stuff on a daily basis, but for some of these guys, that is like pulling teeth. It's really tough. So by allowing the HERS rater, who is very good at going online and checking off stuff, allowing them to sign it off, will make those get signed off more easily. But this whole thing about, does the installer really know what's being signed on their behalf? Because they're taking responsibility for it. So this has to be figured out by the HERS provider, who is the person who administers the organization that administers that registry and trains raters. Okay, they have to figure out what they want to allow with this. So there's some work to be done there. On the non-residential side, I'm blazing along here. On the non-residential side, You don't have this, but there's a similar diagram, very similar for non-residential to the one you have, which is for residential. Some of the names of the forms are different. The process is a little bit different. On the residential side, it's a CF1R, CF2R, CF3R. On the non-residential side, they change the names of the forms. It's the Non-Res Certificate of Compliance, NRCC. And instead of HERS raters, third-party inspectors that we have on residential, there's only one HERS test on non-residential buildings, and that's duct leakage. And it only applies to certain size systems and things like that. So HERS raters don't play nearly as important of a role on the non-res side. And instead of requiring a third-party inspector, which is what a HERS rater is, they basically say the installer can test their own stuff as long as they're qualified to do so. And by qualified to do so, they have to take and pass a certification test. Okay? There's one for lighting installers. There's one for mechanical. When is mechanical going to take effect?
There's no time frame.
There's no time frame, but there's 2 approved training organizations. And when you hit sort of a critical mass of certified people,
as well as uniform coverage,
coverage across the state, then that requirement will kick in. So, but it is in place for lighting. So what this is called acceptance testing. And an acceptance test is we're relying a lot more on these really fancy controls and sensors and fancy controls on the HVAC system that are not easy, almost impossible for a building inspector to go out and say, yeah, that looks good, and check it off. No, you got to go through the whole cycle. You got to simulate the morning time, the afternoon time, full occupancy, part occupancy, and so somebody's got to come in and test that. Okay, I don't want to name any names here, but there's a particular building department that I went to teach a class at, and they had a brand new city hall. Brand new city hall, just built under the, I think it was the 2008 code. And they said, yeah, when we first came into this building, it has all these fancy occupancy sensors. When we walked into the room, all the lights would shut off. And we walked out of the room, the lights would come on. And the ventilation would start. Okay? That's a big problem. Those problems occur because they didn't require the acceptance testing. There's a certificate that requires the installer, who's been through training, to test that system. It's called commissioning, and make sure that it works before they turn it over to the occupants. Okay? So instead of having HERS raters, it's called these acceptance test technicians. But they serve a very similar function. They're basically documenting that they're testing something to make sure it works so that the building departments don't have to. Okay? And then there's also there's features that are tested by the acceptance testing technicians, one by the HERS rater, and then some that are enforced by the building department. Okay, and an example of things that are enforced by building departments are things like window performance factors, R values in the walls, efficiencies of some of the equipment, things that there's kind of a label, and they can just kind of go out and just kind of check it off, looks good, things like that. And then things that require some sort of procedural test or special equipment, like a duct testing device or a blower door or something like that, those are all been delegated to somebody else to inspect. And then there's forms that have to be filled out and signed to document that all happened. Okay. The basic process does not change, just like residential. Most of the changes occur in the prescriptive requirements for new construction. So same issue. The changes are happening in the building that your building is being compared to. The difference is that on the non-residential side, the prescriptive approach, the process of using the prescriptive approach to demonstrate compliance is way more common on the commercial side than it is on the residential side. I don't know, I would guess it might be 50-50. For new non-residential buildings, how many go performance versus how many go prescriptive? Maybe 60-40, something like that. But we're in residential, it was 99.99 took this path. On the non-residential side, it's maybe 30, 40, 50%. We use the prescriptive approach. And so they're just looking at a list of features, saying, okay, you can put in these kind of walls, these kind of windows, this kind of air conditioner, this kind of water heater, and you just go right down the list. Those features are changing. Those features are becoming more efficient, okay? From a building department's perspective, not a whole lot is changing. That information still has to get on a plan. They still have to check that plan. There's still forms that they have to go and look. And like I said, I don't think if there's a building inspector out there who has the prescriptive packages memorized, he's going to have to memorize a new table. I don't think that person exists, to be honest. So they still have to go look at a table. The numbers on the table are going to change for 2016, okay, but not a whole lot of difference. As with residential, the trick is knowing what should be on the plans for plan checkers and then what should be installed for field inspection, okay? The plan checker will either refer to the same prescriptive tables as before, but the features are going to change on those tables, but they're still looking at the same tables. I think the numbers are staying the same. For the non-res certificate of compliance, that's going to be the form that documents the features. They're still going to have to look there. The field inspector will still refer to the plans and the same compliance documents as before, primarily the NRCC certificates for what is required, and the NRCA, the acceptance test certificates, to make sure those things got tested. Okay, so really it's all about making sure a process was followed. On the residential side, the HERS registry does that. On the non-residential side, there is no registry at this time, so you just kind of have to know. But there is something on the non-residential side that I always emphasize in training that I think is very underutilized, and that is the requirement by the Energy Code that non-residential buildings have a commissioning process, that there be an assigned commissioning agent whose job it is to make sure all this happens. Okay, an individual paid consultant whose job it is to make sure this all happens. That is required by the Energy Code for all new non-residential buildings. And then the size of the building determines who that person can be. For smaller buildings, it can be almost anybody. The installer, the engineer who designed the system can do it. But as the building gets bigger and bigger, that person has to step away from the design team and be less involved in the design. So they're more of a third-party person as the building gets bigger, okay? But their job as commissioning agent, if you read it, it says their job is to represent the building owner to make sure the design essence was followed and that all codes were met, okay? Yes?
So can that person, that commissioning agent, can that be someone who works for the contractor? Say like an MEP coordinator?
For smaller buildings, yes. And I forget the thresholds. It's like 0 to 10,000, 10,000 to 30,000, and 50,000, and 50,000 above. So on the smaller one, it can even be, they just have to be an engineer or something.
Same person.
Same person who designs the system can be the commissioning agent. But on the bigger buildings, the commissioning agent can't even be hired by the same company. It has to be a whole separate individual, a separate company.
What's the size on that threshold? They deal with 10-story office.
50,000 square feet. Okay. So to me, that's an underutilized resource that building departments don't really know that much about. And there's actually forms. There's forms that are required to be filled out saying who is your commissioning agent? Have they had a meeting yet? Have they been through this process? And here's all the things they're supposed to check. And then that person signs that form saying, I made sure this happens, I made sure this happens, I made sure that happens. Okay? And that's not new. That's been around in the 2013 code. Any substantial changes for that in the 16 code?
Just architecture language was the main difference.
Yeah.
Threshold was the same.
Yep. So that's all still there. And so the bad news is that requirement does not affect additions and alterations. Major renovations don't have to have a commissioning agent. Okay. Additions, I don't think additions do. No. All right. Some new mandatory measures that building inspectors do need to be aware of, and plan checkers as well, because I think it's very important that this stuff be on the plans, not just on a form floating around somewhere, but actually on the plans. Some new requirements for elevators that Javier mentioned. There's a lighting watts per square feet, ventilation and controls. So those are things that do have to be checked in the field that hadn't had to be checked before. That's a new thing. So the plan checker should make sure those are on the plans. And then the good news is these are all tested by an acceptance test technician. So the field inspector really should just ask for that NRCA form, make sure it gets filled out and signed.
For those, it's actually going to be the installer, the acceptance test technician is specific only to mechanical and lighting, so the cover process is not.
Just the installer?
Yeah.
Okay, okay. So they don't have to worry about a lighting person. Okay, good, good. Escalators and walkways. What do you call a broken escalator?
Stairs.
Yeah.
Blind stairs.
There are some new mandatory requirements for escalators and moving walkways that have not had to be checked before, so these are new. But as was mentioned, they only apply to certain kinds of buildings, you know, airports and things like that. So shopping malls, and don't have to worry about that. Acceptance testing is required, so the inspector just asks for the NRCA forms. The requirements for lighting alterations have been greatly simplified, and the big impact on building departments, a lot less griping by people coming in to get a permit. Okay, that's going to be a big deal. So that's a big improvement. Some additional resources. Bayron provides training and tools for building departments to help them prioritize and streamline the energy plan check efforts. Things like this handout is a good example of the type of stuff that we pass out in our training. We have a lot of checklists, field inspection checklists, plan check checklists. We have a lot of permit guides, quick guides, and we're currently developing some online e-tools that walk you through the process, okay, that we're getting really good responses on so far. If you have any more information or more questions, all of our training materials you can download, take a look at them. Bayron.org. If you have any code-related questions for energy, send them to this email and they'll get forwarded to the appropriate person to answer them. It's sort of our own Bayron hotline, if you will. Okay. Any questions? Any questions on the code changes? Yes, sir.
Residential lighting changes, that apply to alterations as well?
Only if the lighting's being altered. So if you're doing a remodel and part of the remodel is replacing all the lights, if you touch it, it's got to meet the code. But if you're like just doing a remodel and not touching the lights, then the lights don't have to be changed. So it's only if it's being changed.
So you can't put in incandescent fixtures for a remodel?
No. Now what's interesting is if you've got an old house and all the light fixtures are screw-in, all you got to do is change the bulbs to LEDs, and they comply. Yeah. One of the handouts was a application form for training. So be sure if you're a building department, you're thinking about getting some training. We had one of the handouts that when you came in was a list of all the different classes and the ability to sign up for those. And I'm done. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
5% was just something that was achievable in 2012 and allows the project to be case team reviewed.
So they probably got a bunch of data from the HERS registry. What were they coming in tested at? And 5 was an easy threshold. So that's kind of a no-brainer. It makes the math a lot easier. It's a lot easier to figure out 5% of 1,200 than it is 6% of 1,200. Yeah. So, all right, that's all I have.